Welcome to B&B Movie Reviews. This week, we shapeshift with Nimona, take one last adventure with Indy, go on a joyride with four of our besties, and reckon with an impossible mission. Stay tuned, B&B is coming up next.
Promise me you won't freak out.
How can I promise if I don't know what's going to happen?
Well, I guess you'll just have to trust me.
Why would I trust you?
Because if you don't, you're gonna die in this closet.
Die?
So promise.
I promise.
Promise?
On my life.
Then say it again.
I promise!
Oh, wow. Even when you see the horn?
Horn? What do you mean, like a trumpet?
Just promise!
I promise, I will not freak!
This is the part where you run.
Ballister promises Nimona that he won't freak out when they are trapped in the closet looking to escape in Netflix's new animated film, Nimona. So, Brad, Nimona. So, yes. I didn't know, and you told me this, that Nimona is based off of a comic book graphic novel.
Well, it was a webcomic originally from Indy Stevenson, and then they collected it into a graphic novel, and now they've adapted it to a Netflix movie.
Yeah, so, and I was looking forward to this because a lot of people were talking about, the animation style and looking forward to this film, and so it kind of caught my radar, and I really kind of enjoyed watching this film. The first thing that I kind of noticed was the world building, the aesthetic of the world, having this kind of this old school kind of night world.
It's a mashup, right? It's science fiction, hits medieval, with a little bit of steampunk thrown in.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, it's really pleasing.
Yeah, so I love that.
There's a lot going on in the backgrounds of these frames. It feels like a world. They've built something here, and I could live here for several movies.
Nice. So what were some of your thoughts coming into the movie, and how did you feel like you were?
I had a lot of anticipation for it. It does adhere to the spirit of the graphic novel, though there are some significant changes there that I'm still kind of reckoning with.
Okay.
I like the aesthetic. I like some of the animation, although I feel like the animation is pretty inconsistent.
Okay.
And there are shots in this film that look spectacular, and then there are other shots that don't quite look finished.
Now, going into some of the acting, the voice acting, we do have Chloe Grace Moretz as Nimona.
She's fantastic.
And Riz Ahmed, who
also
I
great.
Really enjoyed as Ballister, I think, and their dynamic together I thought really worked well. So I liked hearing that voice acting, and that's one thing that has really started to kind of connect me more to the animation, is seeing the acting coming through in the voice performances.
Totally.
And you can feel that in this movie. At least I think you can.
Chloe Grace Moretz has to do a lot as Nimona.
Yeah.
Nimona's story is very complicated, and it takes her through this emotional journey that I think some people might not be expecting at all based on the trailer, right?
Yeah.
And where her story eventually ends up, there's some heavy lifting that her voice performance has to do, and she succeeds.
She does, because I like, as we get into the third act and we get to learn a little bit more about her backstory, where she came from, and basically how she is as a person, as far as how she responds to people, how she acts towards people. But you see that that's kind of a cover for somebody that is really kind of vulnerable from some of the trauma that she's dealt with in her past. And when all that stuff starts to come out, it gets really, really dark.
It does go to a very dark place at the end.
Yeah.
I do have questions without spoiling things, I do have questions with how they resolve certain consequences in this movie, and what is the ultimate message that is being delivered through Nimona. And I think maybe the filmmakers are unaware of unaware of what a secondary message is. There's something there that I think is actually kind of pretty ugly, and I have questions about. But again, it's hard to talk about in this situation.
I know, without any.
I do think that everyone watching the B&B show should check out Nimona.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot going on in this series, or this movie, and I want to revisit it so that I can challenge some of the feelings that I had on the initial watch.
What's your rating for this right now?
It's very close to falling into a B-, but because I have the desire to rewatch it and reconsider some of the ideas that are in the film, it falls into a B+. I think it is a recommendation.
Okay, yeah, because it's a B+ for me. I think I really responded personally to some of the themes that they were talking about, especially as we got closer to the end of the film. So it's a B+. It's one of the better movies I think I've seen so far this year. So yeah, those are our thoughts on Nimona, B+ for both of us. So stay tuned. When we come back, we are going to go on that last adventure with Indiana Jones. Stay right there.
Today's cancer research is tomorrow's victory. A victory that is there for the taking. Grab it.
Now that was a great halftime speech. Let's go win.
Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
How did you end up like this?
Flaming, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
Indiana Jones and goddaughter Helena Shaw are in a chase for their lives in a scene reminiscent to the Indy classics that we grew up on and love in the final adventure, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Bryan.
Yeah, Indiana Jones, man, we're back.
We're back 15 years after Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
The review I want is not how does this compare to all the Indiana Jones movies that have ever existed. How does it compare to the last one? Does it redeem how some felt about that movie?
It's funny though, because you know my feelings on Indiana Jones. I don't have the nostalgia that a lot of people of our age have for Indiana Jones.
I have, yeah.
But I do love the character. And honestly, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I did a rewatch leading up to this movie. To me, my opinion, it's not as bad as a lot of people make it seem out to be.
I think 15 years later, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not as bad as it felt at the time because it was the return of Indiana Jones. There's so much pressure on an Indiana Jones movie, and I think that pressure now transfers over to Dial of Destiny. And so now it's like, this is the Indiana Jones movie. This is the great send-off.
Yeah.
And honestly, the problem with this being the great send-off is the best send-off that this franchise had was The Last Crusade with Indy, his dad, Brody, Sala, riding off into the sunset.
I know.
It was perfect.
Yes.
But we had to revisit it. And then when you revisit something that was perfect, it's
never going to live up to.
Right, exactly.
It's never going to do that.
And so now here we are in this situation that we were in with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and Dial of Destiny has to be brilliant.
Brilliant to me, it's not. But it's so funny though, because this movie, although there are a lot of issues I have with the film, it does work for me overall. I love the beginning. I love how we go back and we get to see an adventure with Indiana Jones back during,
What do you think of the de-aging?
The de-aging was fine with me. I know that's been a point of conversation for a lot of people online, and some people like it. Some people think it's the worst thing they've ever seen, which, everything is always going to be on one end of the spectrum or the other. It's fine. It looks good for what you can do for that. The voice may take you out of it, but overall, I think the scene as itself, it works as a scene that's
I was
reminiscent.
shocked how much I enjoyed the opening scene because
Yeah.
I was going into it not wanting any de-aged Indiana Jones. Like, philosophically, I'm opposed to it. But 5 minutes into that sequence, the way that it is shot, the way that it is framed, the sequence with the noose and the bomb, I loved all that. The stuff on the train I really liked. I loved the inclusion of Toby Jones as his old friend.
Yeah.
I loved Mads Mikkelsen. I really liked Thomas Kretschmann as the first villain of this movie.
Yeah.
I was on board by that 20-minute mark.
Yeah, I think the thing that really kind of I had issues with in the movie was the second act for me, and a lot of it was some of the ensemble cast. Helena Shaw I liked. It was more so like Boyd Holbrook, an actor of his caliber who is a rising star. For him to kind of be, well, I mean, I know he was in
the Predator, and
the Sandman series and stuff like that.
I like Boyd Holbrook. I like Boyd Holbrook.
Him just to be a henchman that's trigger happy with a gun, I don't know if you needed somebody of his name to play that role. So it was just.
I think you're making his name bigger. Like, I think if you ask everyone in your theater.
They won't know who Boyd Holbrook is. But then also, and this may just be for me, but Antonio Banderas.
This one, everything you just said about Boyd Holbrook, apply it to Antonio Banderas. Totally agree with you.
Yes, because I wanted to see more. I love the history that we have with his character and Indy, and you feel that.
Good performance from Antonio Banderas, but his time is brief in the movie, too brief, and you do wonder, like, well, why is he even here?
Yeah. And I thought there was an interesting, and granted, this is an Indiana Jones movie, so I know that we can't really like deviate too far from his story. But with this movie taking place in 1969 during the space race, and you introduce a character who's a black CIA agent, this black female CIA agent, and what that kind of could speak to, especially like with her, I don't want to give too much away, but where her story kind of goes. And I think during that time period, there could have been something interesting that could have been done in the Indiana Jones movie.
It's a big fumbling. I agree with you on that. I do like Indiana Jones having to reckon with humanity landing on the moon, and where we meet Indiana Jones in 1969, and he is such an old, failed human being, and the way that they use Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to enhance the emotion of Dial of Destiny worked a lot for me. And I love Indiana Jones on that horse racing by the astronauts, looking down at him, because Indiana Jones wants nothing to do with the future. He wants to live in the past.
He does.
And that struggle, that is what made the movie work for me. Not all the action works. James Mangold's a great director, but I think he doesn't necessarily take the win on some of these actions.
Well, what you said about that is like he wants to live in the past, and I know we got to get out of this segment, but what that third act. And I don't want to give anything away.
It's a huge swing.
It's a huge swing, but going to that point, I thought that worked, especially for the character, as far as the decision that he wants to make, I think, and it gives a meta commentary to Indiana Jones as a character in and of itself. But I thought all of that stuff in the third act works.
The final scene of Dial of Destiny, I think, is perfect.
Yes.
I wouldn't change a second of the final scene.
Yeah, so even all the issues I have, it all ultimately works for me. What's your rating for this one?
So I definitely recommend it. We got to give it a B+. I think the digital effects are wonky. I think the action is wonky, but the characters and the emotions work.
Yes.
And I would rather have this movie than not have it. So there you go.
Yeah, same B+ for me. I think it even though I have some issues with some of the characters and the second act, it ultimately works. Like you say, the emotion of it works, and I mean that's all you can ask for one last ride. So those are our thoughts for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. When we return, we go on a road trip with 4 of our best friends. Stay right there.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
현금을 꺼지꺼지 또 많아 꺼지 이연한 꺼지
So are you sure this is gonna work?
BTS Army always comes through. At Cinderella 88, so we should be good to go. Just act confident. We're Brownie Tuesday. We're a brand new group. We just did our debut in Shanghai. Our first single has 9 million downloads. Everyone remember their names?
Sassy.
Cutie.
Lisa, 2.
We got this. We got this.
When the girls have to find a way to get from Beijing to Korea with no passport or money, come up with a plan to disguise themselves as K-pop stars in the new comedic film, Joyride. Brad, Joyride. So,
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago, we reviewed No Hard Feelings. We have Joyride now. So, look, the raunchy comedies, they're making a comeback.
Strays is coming up.
Strays is coming out,
It's weird to have this type of comedy in 2023.
I know.
And I feel kind of weird about it.
Yeah, this movie, it goes for it.
Oh, it goes for it.
It definitely goes for it. Does it hit? Does it land?
Well, I can tell you that in my audience, that a lot of the jokes did not land. I do feel like this film could have used another pass on the script. I got some chuckles out of this movie, but for the most part, the comedy did not work for my taste.
Yeah, it goes for some really big swings, and ultimately, and you could kind of tell when the movie starts and it goes for some big swings and they don't land with the audience, that you kind of know what you're getting yourself into.
But the first big swing, which is a literal swing, does land really well.
Oh,
the opening sequence,
the opening,
where this Chinese family is moving into White Hills, Washington, the outskirts of Seattle, and they feel like they've just walked into a Friends episode, and then this couple, this white couple, comes up to them and says, "Oh, you must be new here," and they get really defensive, and no, it's just we wondering if your daughter would play with our daughter, and those two children, and their daughter is an adoptee, and they meet and they have an instant connection, and then there's that racist kid on the playground, and then you've got the best line from the one kid who just chops that racism down, and then he gets hit with a literal swing. Like that moment, that opening sequence, I was so into, and if the whole movie could contain that sort of balance between this like sweet, humanity, this connection, and the vulgar, it would have been really great, but the film can't maintain that balance.
Yeah, and that's like you say, with the comedy, like that opening bit really works. But then when you transition to them in adulthood and you start to see their lives where they are now, and they try to hit some of those comedy beats, especially like playing off like the race of the women, especially with Ashley Park's character and her job and the men that she works with, and a lot of that stuff just really didn't hit for me. But then like when you get the connection between when they finally get on the road trip with all 4 of the girls, like I like all of them together, and these actresses are really easy to really kind of like and go on this journey with. But it's just some of the execution.
It's a great crew. I want to hang out with them. But the execution and the comedy needs work. The emotions don't. And I think that the conversation that the film doesn't quite embrace, but touches upon this idea of what it must do to your sense of identity, how transracial adoption must mess with people's heads, I thought was fascinating, and the way that the film wants to play with race, and not only the type of racism that you encounter in America, but the type of racism that you might encounter in China.
Exactly.
I liked all of that stuff. Again, the laughs aren't there for me.
No, you're right. And there is a good dramatic or a character-driven story or a character drama there that can be explored, I think, a lot more with some of the themes that they definitely want to tackle and they touch upon in this movie. When we get to the third act, there's some really great scenes with what Ashley Park has to kind of reconcile with.
I mean, I was crying by the end of this movie. I was in tears in the third act.
It was beautifully done.
And I kind of just wish that the movie was a drama about this friendship with like some sprinkling of comedy rather than going so hard with the comedy and not landing it.
What's your overall rating for this one?
You know, the balance didn't work. You mentioned, you know, No Hard Feelings.
Yeah.
And that film struggled with balance as well.
Yeah.
But this movie made me appreciate the struggle that No Hard Feelings had a little bit more. So I'm never going to watch this again. I can't really recommend it. I got to go B-.
Yeah, it's funny looking at No Hard Feelings. It makes me want to go back and retroactively change my score for that movie, because I wasn't really high on that movie, but I think I like the balance of that a little bit more, and with those scenes from that movie that we both enjoy, I think hit a little bit harder, even though the emotions at the end of this movie hit as well. But none of the comedy lands in this movie, so unfortunately, it's a B- for me too. So. Yeah, I know it hurts, but yeah, those are our thoughts on Joyride, a B- for both of us. So stay right there, because we are going to go on this impossible mission with Ethan Hunt. Be right back.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
Ethan, what's your objective? What's your ultimate objective?
Your life will always matter more to me than my own.
None of our lives can matter more than this mission.
I don't accept that.
Ethan Hunt and his IMF team are back with their deadliest mission yet, as Tom Cruise delivers an exhilarating and awe-inspiring entry into the Mission Impossible franchise with Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Part 1.
Bryan, this was a movie that was high on our anticipation list. I was frothing at the mouth before this movie started. We went and saw it at the Udvar Hazy on the biggest screen in Virginia.
Yes.
A lot of anticipation, a lot of expectations coming into Dead Reckoning.
Yes.
Did it deliver for you?
It delivered. Not in the way that I wanted it to, but it delivered. I mean, look, when you get these movies and you get Tom Cruise and his commitment to entertaining the audience and his commitment to the stunts, I mean, that's worth the price of admission, and it really is. But I think it doesn't really, for me, doesn't live up. And again, like you say all the time, expectation could be the enemy of a good time. And I think, unfortunately, that hit me with this. And I don't want to come off negative on this, because there's a lot to really like about this movie. But yeah, it just didn't hit those highs as the last two did for me.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I would say that we're getting a lot of part ones.
We are. Right? We got with 3 this summer already.
Right, and it's a weird trend to see, and some movies work better as a part 1 than other movies. I think we had no complaints with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Across the Spider-Verse. And we had several complaints about Fast 10, right?
Yeah, the part 1 was not one of those.
And I'm not about to compare Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 to Fast 10, but I do feel like when you get done with Dead Reckoning Part 1, you are left hanging. In some cases, literally. And you don't even really know what the threat truly is in Dead Reckoning Part 1. And that mystery sort of nags at the brain a little bit. But I do have a feeling that when we get Dead Reckoning Part 2, and we get the full scope of this story, we won't really have a problem with that.
I hope so, because going to another part 1 and part 2 is coming out later this year with Dune, and it kind of has that same kind of feeling where you know there's another part coming and it doesn't feel as complete as you want it to feel, and sometimes you may not feel the threat of that. And I think that was probably my biggest issue, is not necessarily it being split into 2 different movies, but I think I just didn't feel the stakes the way I did in previous Mission Impossible movies. And
that's pretty interesting, because not everyone makes it out of these movies, Bryan. There are stakes.
And that's the thing I struggle with, because there are stakes, and everybody doesn't make it out. But even to that point, when certain things happen, for whatever reason, I don't feel it. I don't feel, and I don't know if that's from the writing. I don't know if that's from Christopher McQuarrie's direction, or if there's just something that's missing in the storytelling that's not making me connect to the characters in the way that I was connected to them in the previous movies.
Dead Reckoning Part 1 feels very different than Fallout and Rogue Nation. Stylistically, tonally. You know, it's a much longer movie.
Yeah, it is.
And the fact that it's a part 1 makes it feel even longer in some ways. I feel like McQuarrie is trying to go back a little bit to what Brian De Palma was doing in the first Mission Impossible.
Yes.
Not only just bringing Kittredge back, which I love. Love seeing Kittredge back. And the way that Kittredge operates in this movie is brilliant.
Yeah.
But like the style choices that McQuarrie is making, you know, he's doing more Dutch angles. He's trying to pull off that De Palma look.
Yeah.
And I responded to that quite well, but I do think that it also depletes from the intensity of the action sequences that we got in Rogue Nation and Fallout.
Yeah, I'm trying not to really spoil.
Don't spoil anything, but I know that one of the problems that you have is a problem that I have.
Yeah.
It is a huge spoiler, and I'm almost offended by it, but because I enjoy the filmmaking so much of these movies, and because I really like the squad and the hijinks that they get up to and the types of spy shenanigans that you can expect and you can expect to be subverted, that offensive moment for me doesn't rise to dislike.
Yeah, I guess another thing was really just the villain. And I know, like, we talked about, like, what's the character of Esai Morales, and I know we talked about this before, where maybe he is not really the main.
Yeah, I mean, every Mission Impossible movie has a MacGuffin, right?
Yes.
You know, the rabbit's foot, the knock list, whatever.
Yeah.
This movie has a MacGuffin, and then it has somebody who wants that MacGuffin, and then there's something going on above Esai Morales that I loved. And I have a feeling that you're not quite there yet.
No, and I think that goes to how I'm feeling about, I just don't feel the intensity of the threat. I'm not feeling the stakes. I'm not feeling like the intensity or the threat from this villain or this guy. Like, it's funny going back and rewatching all the Mission Impossible movies leading up to Dead Reckoning and seeing all the different villains. I go back to Philip Seymour Hoffman from Mission Impossible 3. Watching that movie, like, you feel like the threat that he has towards Ethan Hunt. So, like, I don't, even with Solomon Lane from the last 2 movies.
I love Solomon Lane. He's probably my favorite one.
Solomon Lane is great. For whatever reason, introducing this new villain, I'm not seeing, and I don't want to have to compare from another movie.
Well, he's a colder villain, right? And he is a character with ties to Ethan Hunt that are a mystery to us. And I guess they're going to hold that mystery until the next film. And I wonder if that withholding was a smart choice.
That might be it. Yeah.
But also, like, that little bit of history that we get about Ethan Hunt in this film kind of explains a lot of his relationships with the women of this franchise and how kind of uncomfortable, problematic, and gross Ethan Hunt's relationships are with the female counterparts.
Yeah.
And it's heightened to a point that gets into the thing that I was offended by.
Exactly, and maybe they'll try to explain more in part 2. But
Bryan, in this movie,
and that's why I have to recommend this. I mean, I'm giving this a B+, of course, because regardless of my issues with the film, Tom Cruise, again, he makes these movies to be seen on the biggest screen possible, and it's worth the price of admission to go and see this on the big screen.
And you've seen segments of these action scenes in the trailers. You know, the jump, like that motorcycle jump, is absurd, and they really sold this movie on that jump. And it comes late in the movie, and because you've seen it before already, the impact is loosened a little bit.
Yeah.
But that train sequence as a whole,
that's
out of sight.
That's exciting. What's your grade?
B+, Bryan. Why are you even asking?
I know. So it's a B+ for me as well, even with all my issues. So yeah, that's our score. It's a B+ for that. So let's recap what we reviewed this week. We go back to Nimona. Me and Brad both give that a B+. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny Destiny, we give that a B+. Joyride, unfortunately, not one of the better comedies this summer. That is a B- for both of us. And Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. That is a B+ for us. So, thank you for joining us on this latest episode of B&B Movie Reviews. Come be a part of the conversation. If you have questions, suggestions, feel free to email us at bnbmoviereviews@gmail.com. And with that, we will see you at the movies.